Hello, everyone. Welcome to my next live stream. I'm super excited because this is a NaNoWriMo specific live stream or a Preptober live stream. So we are trying to get ready for NaNoWriMo. If you guys don't know what NaNoWriMo is, it stands for National Novel Writing Month. And it's when writers around the world challenge themselves to write a novel in 30 days. So 50,000 words, 30 days. It equates to about 1,667 words, 1,667 words per day. So you don't have to participate in NaNoWriMo to be on the web chat, but that's what our theme today is going to be about, is about prepping for NaNoWriMo and getting ready for NaNoWriMo. And I'm excited to hear all of your questions that you have for prepping on to write a novel or the process of writing a novel. So before we begin, I see we already have some questions, which is great. I can't wait to get to them. Before we begin, just so you know, I'm going to be prioritizing questions that I think will benefit the most people. So I know we're going to have a lot of questions that I'm not going to be able to get to, and I apologize for that. But so if you have a question that you think a lot of people might benefit from, please post it. I'm going to be prioritizing those. I'm also going to be prioritizing questions that revolve around prepping to write a novel or the process of writing a novel. So with that being said, we have some questions and we're going to get started. So I have a question about from moving forward, is asking, I'm trying to develop a strong antagonist for a horror or thriller mystery. Do you have any guidelines or conventions that you like for developing a strong antagonist? I actually get this question a lot because my book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, doesn't really go that deep into villains or antagonists in terms of how to build a really good one. So, and it's something that I'm definitely thinking about if I write any future books is going into that. But my best advice for writing villains or antagonists is to give them beats. Like, villains should have sort of an arc, even if it doesn't mean that they're going to become like a better person by the end, or they're going to like, you know, become less bad or anything like that, but they should have sort of movement throughout the book. So one tip is to make sure that they are sort of moving forward in some way, and they're not just like stagnantly like pursuing one goal, and they just, you know, the whole time they're not really changing their strategy or anything like that. So make sure that they are kind of moving forward in some way. My other tip is to, you know, make sure that they are people. They're realistic people, and that you as an author really understand who they are and what makes them evil. Because if you can't understand that, or if you can't wrap your head around really understand that person and what their motivations are, then your reader will not be able to either. I think the best villains are the ones where you go, huh, they're really evil, but they sort of have a point. You know, like they're sort of angry about this one thing that I can understand why they've become who they've become. And I think those are the most formidable villains. So that would be my tip for you. Okay, I'm going to go back here. Tobias has a bunch of questions, and I'm going to try to pick the ones that are best, that are going to benefit the most people. So he's asking about the difference between the structure that I wrote, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and Blake Snyder wrote his book, Save the Cat. So as you know, you probably know, Save the Cat Writes a Novel is a novel adaptation of Blake's book called Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. And I have made a few changes in the way I present the material. And the way that the reason I've made those changes, for instance, one of the big ones is he talks about logline first. I talk about logline almost last. So the way that I've structured my novel, my book, the way that to kind of emulate my writing process. So I feel like it's difficult to write a logline or a pitch until you've really nailed down the beats of your story, until you really know what your story is about. I think trying to write a logline based on just an idea or just you know, a few concepts in your head is just going to kind of run you around in circles. Of course, you can write a logline whenever you want, but I find that the most organic way to approach the novel writing process is the way that I laid out the book, which is to tackle the main character first, the hero, figure out what their wants are, what their needs are, what their biggest flaws are, what their biggest challenges in life are. And then from there, insert them into a plot. And that plot would have 15 beats. So that's why I tackle the hero first, then the 15 beats. And then once you sort of have the 15 beats, you can either start diving into specific genres if you want, or you can start trying to nail down your pitch or your logline. So I think that's the most organic way. Of course, you can do it however you want. The book is kind of laid out where you can jump around if you want. So, but that's the way I recommend people start, especially when they're starting a new idea. Okay, so Doreen is asking, I have an idea for my book, and lots of ideas for the story and the characters, but I'm not sure if my hero's theme is a good one. This is I think a common fear. You know, I always say that like every novel should have a theme or a life lesson that your hero has to learn. Otherwise, why are we going on this journey with this hero? And I think it's natural for you to worry that maybe your theme is not strong enough or not. Is not inspiring enough, or maybe not like intricate enough or something like that. I mean, I think the best thing for you to do is to write the book based on the theme you have, and then see how it's feeling as the book goes on. If you're really worried about it up front and you're like, I don't want to write it until I really know the theme, or I really have a better idea of the theme, just ask around. You know, ask somebody, if you were to read a story about someone who goes from A to B, someone who learns this life lesson, do you think that's interesting? Do you think that's relatable? Because the best themes are the ones that are the most relatable. You know, like forgiveness and learning to trust and learning to let go of control, things like that. It's things that we're all dealing with. So I'm curious to see if, like, Doreen, if your problem is that you think you're worried about your theme because it's actually maybe a theme that most people deal with, so you think maybe it's not that unique. But themes are really not that unique. They're kind of stuff that we're all dealing with, but they're just being told and respun over and over again into many different forms. But I guess my best advice would be for you to ask around and see what other people are thinking, especially other writers. Could you recommend, Dan's asking, can you recommend 2 or 3 contemporary books that are fun to read and also highlight good plotting and structure? That's a good question. Oh gosh, I hate having to recommend books off the top of my head because I always worry I'm going to forget like the best one. Let's see, contemporary. When he's asking contemporary, I'm thinking he's meaning like modern day books that take place in modern day that are not genre, not fantasy, not sci-fi. I always think Sophie Kinsella's books are really well plotted. So she writes adult contemporary kind of comedies, and I actually feature one of her books in my book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I think she's an excellent plotter. So I would recommend one of those. I'm just glancing over here at my bookshelf. Oh, Leanne Moriarty writes fantastic books, and she's one of my favorite contemporary authors. I would any of her books I would pick up, and she does a great job with multiple points of view. So if you're writing multiple points of view and you really want an example of that done well, I would check out Leanne Moriarty's books, because almost all of them have multiple points of view. On the young adult side, Nicola Yoon has fantastic plotting and structure. I actually break down everything in Save the Cat. And she has another one called The Sun is Also a Star, which is fantastic. Yeah, I think I'll go with those for now. But if I come up with any as I'm talking through other questions, I will let you know. Oh, my comments just jumped. Sorry, you'll have to bear with me as I navigate these comments. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to read them and like actually figure out which ones are going to benefit the most people. Okay, this one's about NaNoWriMo specifically, so I'm going to read this one. This is from the Kai Chronicles. For NaNoWriMo, I tend to do a lot more pantsing than usual. Do you have any suggestions for how to best integrate the Save the Cat beats during revision rather than drafting plotting? I love this question, actually. And I've never been asked this question specifically. I mean, I talk about this, but this is a great question. So for those of you who don't know, a pantser is someone who does not like to outline ahead of time. They like to write by the seat of their pants. So they just kind of go and figure it out as they go, or figure it out later, versus a plotter, who's someone who figures it out beforehand, or at least attempts to. Plotters are always like such ambitious people. We think we're going to figure it all out, and it never happens that way. So I think we're all sort of pantsers in some way or another. But it's a great question. So when I present the Save the Cat method, I am very, very adamant about the fact that it is not a method just for plotters. It can be used for plotters. But it is very much a method of how to insert structure into your story, whether you're doing that up front as a plotter or whether you're doing that after the fact as a pantser in the revision process. So my best advice for you when you are revising a novel is to build a beat sheet after you are finished with your manuscript. It depends on where you are in the manuscript. Like if you've drafted like a really, really messy first draft that just makes no sense and doesn't really have any structure, you may want to start your beat sheet from scratch. You may want to say, okay, given what I've written and given what I know about the hero and the world and the story and where I want it to go, what is the perfect beat sheet for that? Like, how do I envision that happening? And that's when you'll, break out the 15 beats and study them and figure out how it's working. If you already have a manuscript that's like, I've got some structure in here and I'm really liking the way that this storyline is going or that the way that the character's arcing here, then you're basically going to be building a roadmap for revision. You're going to be pulling stuff from your existing manuscript, putting it into the beats and saying, I like this beat. I like this part of the fun and games, or I like this part of the debate, but I actually think it goes in the fun and games. So you're going to start pulling things and moving them around. And the beat sheet's going to serve as your roadmap or for revision or your revision plan. So yeah, that's how I would tackle it. Is I would create a brand new beat sheet and start pulling what you like from your manuscript in and using that to help you rearrange things and figure out where your holes are, where you need to flesh out more plot lines and things like that. I mean, I do that too. Even though I start with a beat sheet, I'm a plotter. The beat sheet that I end up with at the end is very different than what I started with. So even though I start as a plotter and then I write the manuscript, when it's time to revise, I still have to kind of create a new version of the beat sheet, and I use that to revise. Okay. What are some ways, Rosario is asking, what are some ways to test that we are pacing our story well? Pacing tests. Well, the best advice I can give you is that every chapter needs to have movement. So, or if you have scenes, if you break your novel into scenes, every scene has to have movement. And what do I mean by that? I mean that every scene or chapter should have a question and an answer. So sometimes the question is the character is coming into a scene with maybe a goal for that scene. Like, okay, I'm coming into this scene to, ask my crush to the dance. So that's the question is, will she go to the dance with me or will she say yes? And then the scene has to have an answer. Even if the answer is a delayed one, like, oh, well, she's not home. So that question's going to get delayed to the next scene, or the answer is yes, or the answer is no. That's a very simplistic, example. But I think that every scene has to have sort of a question and an answer, or so a question and an answer, which is usually some sort of goal that the character's after. I also think each scene should have emotional shift. So the character comes into the scene with this question of, oh, will she go to the dance with me? I don't know if she's going to say yes. I don't know if she's going to say no. So he or she comes in with the feeling of anxiety or uncertainty. And depending on the answer, they're going to leave the scene in a different state, a state of depression, a state of elation, things like that. So I think if you are checklisting your scenes that way and you're making sure that every scene has an emotional shift and every scene has sort of a question to be answered or a goal and a resolution, even if they're really small ones, then you are going to be on the right path for your pacing. Now, here's a really advanced tip that I actually just discovered with my last book that I wrote, which is the sequel to Sky Without Stars, my sci-fi Les Mis retelling. My co-writer and I discovered that every scene has sort of a mini beat sheet. And we were like, when we discovered this, it was sort of like mind blown. So we were finding that like a lot of scenes from other books that we loved had sort of a setup, like what does the scene look like at the beginning? A catalyst, something that kind of happens in the scene that sort of sends the scene in a new direction. A break into two when the character makes some sort of decision based on the catalyst. Oftentimes the scene had a midpoint, which is the false victory or false defeat. The character thinks they're going to get what they want in the scene, or the scene is going very well, a false victory, or the scene is not going very well, false defeat. And then we would often find there was a low point, like an all is lost, where it seems all is lost. And we found that scenes often end either on all is lost, or they would end on like break into threes, like, oh, I've got a new plan now, I'm going to do that. And then the next chapter would be that new plan, and it would start all over again. So that's sort of an advanced technique that if you want to give it a try, it's really kind of crazy and fun. It's not something you have to do, but if you are worried about pacing, if you can break down your scenes into these little mini beat sheets, you're going to have a pretty stellar, well-paced novel. Oh, okay. Someone is writing Liliana. Liliana, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing people's names. I'm starting to write now, and I've chosen to start with short stories. That's great. Are there any differences between writing short stories and writing novels? Um, yeah, well, there's obviously a big difference in that short stories are shorter. I actually think short stories are harder, but that's just me because I like to write long books. So the idea of trying to tell a story in like 10 to 20 pages is like, how do you do that? So that's sort of the main difference is length. But in terms of the 15 beats, I claim that there is no difference. I am a big believer that every story, no matter the length, should have a great character arc. And the way to track a great character arc is to build in the 15 beats of the Save the Cat method. So it's just going to be a lot shorter. So for example, if your short story is 10 pages long, your catalyst is going to happen by the end of page 1. And your break into 2 is going to happen by the end of page 2. So it's just going to be much more condensed. But I think if you can really build in a beat sheet into your short stories, you're going to have some really awesome short stories. So I got a question actually before the podcast that I wanted, or podcast, I don't know what everything's called anymore, before the webcast live stream jigamabob. I got a question beforehand that I think a lot of people are asking, and I want to address it before I get back into these questions. And that is the question of pacing in terms of where the beats go, and do you have to stick 100% to the guidelines I've presented in Save the Cat Writes a Novel. So in Save the Cat Writes a Novel, I say the catalyst should come at 10%, and the break into 2 should come at God, I'm going to forget what I said. Maybe it was 20%. Whatever it is, I have these sort of percentages of the novel where the beats should go. And someone asked, yeah, but what about, for first-time novelists, when you're submitting your book to an agent, a lot of times they'll only read the first 30 pages. So if you're still in the setup in your first 30 pages, like your catalyst is not coming till page 50 or 40 because it's a 400-page novel, then how do you sort of suck people in if you're just like writing a bunch of setup? So I think this is a really good question. And I think it speaks to the fact that the guidelines I've presented with these percentages are very much guidelines. Like you should treat them as guidelines. You should not write 10%, 10 pages of, or sorry, like 30 pages of setup just because I said 10%. You should write the setup the length that it needs to be, and you should put the catalyst where it needs to be. That being said, later catalysts can have the problem of people not staying in the game long enough to get to the catalyst. And the catalyst is really when the story picks up. So how do we bring people into the story quickly? My best piece of advice to that is multiple catalysts. So if you've read any of my books, you probably recognize that I often will put catalysts on the first page. So like the book 52 Reasons to Hate My Father, it starts where she's just crashed her Mercedes into a convenience store on Sunset Boulevard, and now she's dealing with the aftermath. So it literally starts with a catalyst. In my book Unremembered, it literally starts with a girl who has just survived a plane crash. So there is a catalyst, kind of like an action beat at the first page. And then I present a second catalyst is the one that's going to move the character towards Act 2. So I'm a big fan of multiple catalysts. So just because the main catalyst, the primary catalyst comes on 10%, doesn't mean you can't have like really great action moving scenes. And I mean moving the plot at the beginning. So multiple catalysts are a great way to kind of keep your reader turning the pages until you get to that primary catalysts, and the primary catalyst job is to direct the hero towards the break into two, or act two. So that's, I think, a good piece of advice for writers, especially ones trying to get published for the first time. Do you have any writing tips for writing dialogue? In particular, sorry, this is Dan. In particular, I struggle with the part of dialogue that describes what the characters are doing while they are talking. Oh, yeah, that can be challenging. So, interspersing dialogue and action is sort of a more advanced writer skill that takes practice. It also takes a lot of study. Like if you break down scenes, and this sounds like really mundane and really boring, but I would recommend taking a scene that you love from a book and either photocopying it, or if you don't mind writing in the book, just start like highlighting or marking dialogue action, and see if you can't figure out the rhythm. I don't think there's any like, I could be proven wrong by writing teachers who are masters of dialogue, but I don't think there's any like formula for like, oh, you have to have 3 lines of dialogue and then an action, and then you have to have 3 lines of dialogue and then an action. I don't think that really exists, but I think that you have to have that like really good blend and mix of action and dialogue. You don't want to separate pieces of dialogue by too much action, because then people lose track of the conversation. But you also don't want to have too much dialogue in a row, because then it's just talking heads and nobody's really doing anything. I like to sort of intersperse not only dialogue and action, but dialogue and thoughts. So I like to have my characters react to the dialogue. But again, it's always a balance, because you don't want your character to react to every piece of dialogue. Every line that the other person says, your character can't have a reaction to, because it will just become very tedious. So I think it's just a matter of practicing those layers of dialogue and action and thought. I've been using Save the Cat Writes a Novel to reverse outline my manuscript, and it's been a lifesaver. Oh, that's cool. Reverse outline. I like that. Yeah, so that sort of goes along with the revision process. Great. So Mary is asking, I'm working on 2 books, both in the new adult genre. Do you have any literary agents? Do you know of any literary agents particularly interested in that genre? I don't actually know offhand what literary agents like which genre, but my best advice for you is to get a subscription to, I think it's called writersmarket.com. There's also one called querytracker.com, I think. If someone knows the correct terms, please put them in the comments, the correct sites. But there's multiple sites. If you really Google like literary agent directory, you're gonna get there. But basically, you subscribe to these services and you can search by genre that you're writing. It will tell you what agents are looking for that genre. And then I think the best thing to do is then to find those agents and then research those agents on your own to make sure that that directory is up to date, to make sure that agent is still looking for those types of books, and to kind of research what that agent has sold already to see if they really are in the same vein as what you are looking for. But that's my best advice for making sure that you're matching your literary agent to your genre, because yes, you do not want to submit books to agents that don't actually represent that genre. You want to do your research ahead of time. Otherwise, the agent's just going to throw it out immediately, because they're going to say, oh, I don't do this. Okay. So Tobias has asked, how does one go about choosing a publisher? Did you get commissioned to write for Disney? If I were to write a book that I hope Hollywood will take interest in, what should I do? Okay, so there's kind of 3 questions here. I'm going to try to tackle them one by one. So in terms of choosing a publisher, if you are going the traditional publishing route, then you are going to get an agent first, and the agent is going to help you choose the publisher. So it's not really your job, which is good, because it's the agent's job to figure out which publishers are doing well in what genres. So if you're going the self-publishing route, I don't know much about it. I did not self-publish, so I would definitely Google or search on YouTube. There are a ton of fabulous, really knowledgeable self-published authors who tell you exactly how they did it. and how they picked which self-publishing route to go to and which services to use. So I would defer to them because I don't know much about it. In terms of the Disney books, yeah, so I wrote a series of books for Disney. They did come to me for those books. So when you're writing professionally and you have an agent, a lot of times the agents will get contacted by publishers like Disney or Random House or HarperCollins, and they'll say, we're working on this intellectual property book. So an intellectual property book is usually a book that's based on something that already exists, like the Marvel comics or Disney franchises or a television show, Stranger Things, things like that. And that's an intellectual property, and then they want to put match a book with it. So they'll say, I'm working on a book like this. Do you have any authors that would be interested or good for that? So that's usually how you get commissioned to write these kinds of books is through an agent. I don't think I could be wrong. I don't think that you can actually go to Disney and ask them to write a book, but because I'm not sure who you would go to, and I'm not sure if they would respond to something like a question like that wasn't coming from an agent. So my best advice, if you do want to traditionally publish and you do want to do these, they're called write for hires for intellectual property, is to go through is to get an agent first. And in terms of hope Hollywood will take interest, so that's another question that I only have my experience. For some of my books have been optioned for film and TV, which is really exciting. That all happened through my agent as well. So most literary agents have connections with Hollywood agents, and the literary agent will, as soon as they represent your book, they will show it to their Hollywood counterparts and like literary agents in Hollywood, whose job it is to option your book and sell your book to studios and things. They will usually help facilitate that process. So that's how it worked for me. Like I said, there's a million ways to go about things, but I can only talk to what I know. Okay, Isabella has asked, any advice on how to apply Save the Cat when writing a personal essay or creative nonfiction? Oh, great question. So I also think that Save the Cat beats work for creative nonfiction, personal essays, memoirs. Unfortunately, I've never actually done it. I've only read other memoirs and personal essays and creative nonfiction, so I can see where the beats are falling. But really, this Save the Cat is the language of storytelling. That's actually the new motto for the Save the Cat universe. We're calling it the language of storytelling. And it's because it really speaks to what a story needs to captivate an audience and to give it weight and depth and purpose. So when you're writing something like a personal essay, you need to search for those beats in that personal story. And a lot of times that's more challenging than writing a fiction story, because it's your own personal experience and it's really hard for you to see it in sort of an objective storyteller way. But it does often require you to play with timelines, to play with the way information is presented. If you have a really great catalyst, but it doesn't happen until 75% of the way through your personal story, then you probably need to rearrange the way that story is told, and you probably need to tell the catalyst earlier and use the other things that were supposed to come before it as flashbacks later on. So you're just going to have to really rearrange the way that the story is told. So I think it's a really great way to put your personal essay and your personal story to the test of, is this a dynamic story? Because a lot of people say, I have a really great life story I want to tell. And that's great. And I'm sure it is a great life story. But it's one thing to have a great life story, and it's another thing to tell it in an engaging way. So the beat sheet can really help you figure out how to lay those story points out. But I'm hoping to get more into the personal essay, creative nonfiction in the future in terms of analyzing it and helping nonfiction writers tackle that. As of right now, I've only sort of got a little bit of experience with it. Doreen is asking, at what point in your writing career do you hire an agent, and how do you find one? Okay, so agents. We can talk about agents for a little bit. I'm actually going to post, if you guys want more information about agents, I do have a class on it, a workshop called Sell Your Novel to a Major Publisher that will walk you through way more detail than I'm going to give you now. I've just created a link. I've just posted a link that will link you to all my online courses. So check out that course if you really are interested in finding an agent and getting published traditionally. In terms of at what point in your career, so you really can't sign with an agent until you have a finished book. So agents will sometimes sign you on a half finished book, but I would just finish the book because you're going to have a much better chance. Most agents, when you approach them and say, will you represent me? Here's what my book's about. They will say, yeah, send it to me. And then when you say, well, it's only half finished, they'll say, okay, contact me when it's finished. So I think the first step is to finish the book and get it into a position where you think it's really strong. So that's sort of the first step in terms of what stage you should be at. I don't think it matters how many books you've written. I think if you have a book that you think is ready and is publishable, then that's when you're ready to find an agent. The second step is actually finding the agent, and that's when you're going to refer back to these literary agent directories that I mentioned before. Again, just Google literary agent directory, and you'll find some great online ones. And you're going to start doing research about agents and narrowing down a list of people that you think would best represent your book. And the best thing about agents is they're actually really approachable. Most agents will accept what's called a query letter, and that's when you email them basically a synopsis of your book, like a pitch for your book, a marketing pitch that says, here's what my book's about, and here's why I think it would fit with what you do and what you represent, and do you want to read it? And usually the agent will respond with no, or yes, send me the first 30 pages, or send me half the manuscript, or send me the full manuscript. So from there, if they like the book, they will offer you representation. The piece of warning I give everyone, and it's just something I feel very strongly about, you do not have to pay an agent. So if an agent is asking you for money up front to read your book or to represent your book, they are not a legitimate agent. It's probably a scam, or they're just not a real agent. So agents only make money when you make money. So it's what makes it's what builds trust in the relationship. So they're only going to sign you and represent you if they think they can sell your book, because that's when they get paid, is when you sell the book. They get 15%. It's the standard agent amount. So just word of warning, if you have an agent out, someone who's saying, oh, I'm going to read your book and it's going to cost you $500, don't do it. Okay. So the Kai Chronicles is asked, is there anything you would like to add or change in a Save the Cat second edition or companion book? Oh, this is such a great question, because I'm already starting to think about what I could write next in the Save the Cat universe. So I'm always open to suggestions. You can contact me on my website, my contact form, and suggest things that you think are missing from the Save the Cat book that you'd like to see in a follow-up book. And I will definitely keep that in mind. In terms of changing this book, I don't have a lot of things I'd like to change or add. I think this is a very complete book. At some point, I'll probably do a second edition that will include all new beat sheets. Because, books that are popular today, may not be popular in 5 years. So I would like to continue to update this book with new examples that keep it relevant and that make sure that I'm touching upon books that people are reading now or that they're familiar with now. So that's something I have in mind. Beyond that, I have a few ideas that are brewing and some things that I'm not allowed to talk about yet. So I'm just gonna leave it at that and be all coy. I apologize, but let's just say there might be something coming. You'll have to wait and see. But I would love to continue to write in this universe. Okay, Isabella is saying, I love your course on the 15 beats, and will you be doing a companion Udemy course on the 10 genres? I hadn't thought of that, Isabella. That's a really good idea. So for those of you who are familiar with my Udemy course, I do teach a course on the Save the Cat method. So it's a companion course to the book. You can be taken, without the book or with the book. Either way, it stands by itself. And you guys can click on that link to find that course if you'd like. And I don't go into the 10 genres in that course, because it's really more of a sort of an introduction to the beats and a focus on the structuring of a novel. The genres, so those of you who are not familiar, the Save the Cat breaks down all stories into 10 genres. And these are not like comedy, horror, sci-fi. Those are considered genres of tone. The story genres are genres of story. So they're the type of story you're trying to tell. For example, there's a genre called superhero, and these are about kind of heroes that are extra special and have something special about them, like a gift or a curse, and they have to come to terms with being special. The most famous example is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or most famous example of our day. So I think that, so that's like one example. Another example would be like Dude with a Problem. And this is a kind of story about an average guy or girl, average character who finds themselves in like above average, extraordinary circumstances. Like a really big problem approaches them. So a great example of that would be The Martian by Andy Weir, because he's sort of just this average astronaut who finds himself stranded on Mars, a very big problem. So he's our dude astronaut with a problem. So these are the kind of genres I'm talking about. They're just the type of story. What the genres are meant to do. And I want to talk about the genres for a second, because I know I get questions about them a lot. So what the genres are meant to do is they're to help you distill your story even further, to figure out what makes that type of story work. So the 15 beats are designed to help you navigate a story. And that's sort of on a general, very broad spectrum of story. And then the genres help you kind of go even deeper. And if you can figure out what genre your story belongs into, it will help you kind of figure out what needs to be present and what works in that type of story. So for example, if you are writing a dude with a problem, the dude with a problem genre has like a checklist of things that should be in dude with a problem books. I'm going to try to find it very quickly. Nope, that's not it. I think I remember where everything was like by now. Is this one it? Yeah. Okay. So for the dude with a problem, you need an innocent hero. You need a sudden event that thrusts the hero into action, and you need a life or death battle. So for example, the book, To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. It's not a dude with a problem, because she doesn't have a life or death battle. She doesn't have, sort of a sudden event that thrusts her in, and she isn't sort of an innocent hero. But so those are the kind of the criteria for a dude with a problem. So it really helps you kind of study other books that are similar to yours and help you make sure that you have those elements included in your book, in your novel. So they're really, it's like an extra level of detail about storytelling. So maybe one day I would do a class on the 10 genres. That would probably be interesting, and I'll definitely keep that in mind. For now, it's just the beats on the course level. But here's the thing about the genres, which sometimes I'll get people, they'll say like, well, you said that this book was this genre, but I think it's this genre. And that's what's so great about novels in general, is like they fit into multiple genres a lot of times. My best example is the book Les Miserables, which I know very well because I did a retelling of it. So I think Les Miserables can be multiple genres. It could be an institutionalized, because it's about the institution of this period in France, like post-revolutionary France, where there's this very big class divide, and it's about the kind of corruption and poverty and the miserables, and how they're affected by this institution. And it's all of these different stories that tie into that. It could also be considered a superhero, because Jean Valjean is sort of a superhero. He's a hero who has a mission to be good, and he's got a nemesis who's opposing him. And he's sort of, has this kind of curse on him of like this poverty curse and this criminal past curse. So I feel like it could be a lot of different genres. I kind of tell people, don't get too wrapped up in what other books are. The other books are there to help, guide you. If you think that one book is a dude with a problem and I said it was a full triumphant then that's fine. Study it as a dude with a problem and use that to help you craft your own dude with a problem. The genres are really there to help guide you into more direction for your own story. Okay. Someone has asked, do you princess lessons? I like that title. I like that profile name. Do you offer manuscript of beat sheet consults for writer? If so, where can we find details? Unfortunately, I don't. I'm sorry. I do get asked this a lot. It's honestly just a matter of time. I just don't have the time. I am currently on 3 different book deadlines that are all due within the next like 9 months. So I'm pretty busy, and I don't really have time to do the consults. I'm very sorry. However, if you go to savethecat.com, they do have beat master cats. They're called master cats. They're people sort of trained in the Save the Cat method who do beat sheet consultations. The one caveat is most of them are screenwriters that are doing them. They're not specifically novel writers, but I would argue that a beat sheet is a beat sheet, and you can take a beat sheet and you can write a screenplay off of it. You can write a novel off of it, because the beat sheet is really the language of the story. It's the code of the story. So if you want to see if your beats are fitting a story that's that good story template, then I would recommend hiring one of the Save the Cat master cats to take a look at it. And so you can find that on savethecat.com. Dan is asking, are there any common or frequent mistakes that you see when people try to apply the 15 beats to their stories? Really good question. Yes, I see a lot of common mistakes. The most common one actually I see is when it comes to the hero's goal. So I think a lot of writers struggle with trying to define a tangible goal. So I think every good story should have a tangible goal, something that the hero is chasing or pursuing when the story starts. If you don't have a tangible goal, if you don't have your character chasing something or pursuing something, your character might come off as a little bit dull, or a little bit just kind of wishy-washy, or a little bit of a wanderer, because the truth of the matter is we're all pursuing something. We're all kind of like after something. And the trick of figuring out what your hero's goal is to ask yourself or your hero the question, what will make your life better? When you have a flawed hero you should have a flawed hero, and you have this flawed hero and their life is very flawed because of all their flaws. And you sit them down and you say, well, your life's kind of a mess. So what are you doing about that? What's going to help that? They usually are going to have an answer for you. And I'll tell you right now, it's usually the wrong answer. But that's sort of the whole point of the story. So they'll usually say, well, yeah, my life's a mess, but it's only because, I can't get a promotion at work and they keep promoting everyone else above me. So as soon as I get this promotion, my life will be back on track. Okay, chances are that's not going to be the case. Even if they get the promotion, their life's probably not going to get all settled in, because the problem that they're facing is going deeper than just this promotion at work, right? But they're usually going to have that answer because heroes like easy fixes. They like to think that everything's on the surface and everything's superficial. But we as writers know that everything goes deeper than that, and it should. Otherwise, the story is kind of dumb. It would be just a story about a guy who gets a promotion and his life is all fixed, and we would all be like, yeah, I don't think so. So I see a lot of people go, well, my hero's goal is, they either mix it up with the need and they say my hero's goal is to learn how to trust. And I'll say, no, that's actually probably their need, is the thing that they don't really quite know that they need yet. And they're going to have to work towards by the end of the story. Their goal needs to be something a little bit more concrete and a little bit something more on the surface level. Or they'll say, a lot of people will have a very kind of intangible goal. Like, my hero's goal is to get over the death of their father. Well, that's great, but how do we know when they've done that? Because as readers, we don't have anything to gauge like their grief, unless they actually said to us, I'm over it now, which is, not very interesting storytelling. So we need to give that goal that my hero's goal is to get over the death of their story. We need to give it something, the death of their father. We need to give it something tangible. Like, my hero just wants to bury her father's ashes, in a place that was meaningful to them, like, and in their backyard that they grew up in. So then now we have a tangible goal because now we have a tangible thing that they are trying to get to a tangible place. And maybe some of the story is about them trying to get to that place to bury those ashes. And now we know that when they bury the ashes, they will feel like they have, you know, grieved their father properly. So these are just examples off the top of my head. But that is actually one of the most common mistakes I see is the goal being a little mushy. Another big mistake I see is people not taking advantage of the midpoint. The midpoint beat is a very important beat, and it has so much potential because when you read a book that the midpoint, when the author really, really nailed the midpoint, it's what propels the reader to read the rest of the story. Because let's face it, like 400-page book, let's just use 400 pages as an example. 200 pages to get through to get to the midpoint, that's a long way. And you have a lot of chances to lose your reader. So if you don't do something really explosive and important and life-changing and pivoting at the midpoint, like by raising the stakes, by introducing a twist, by changing the hero's goal, by giving them this really great false victory or false defeat, by introducing a time clock, by all these things that I list that make great midpoints. If you don't do that by the midpoint and sort of shift the story in a new direction, the reader's gonna just psychologically go, okay, I still got 200 pages left. Like, where's this story going? I've been reading kind of the same thing. So that's why the midpoint is an ultra shift. It's like it's probably, I would argue, the biggest turning point of the book. So I see a lot of readers just not really understand, or sorry, writers not really understand that or not really take advantage of that. And that's when you start to lose readers. But as soon as if you nail that midpoint, then they look at the next 200 pages and go, oh my God, I only have 200 pages to see what's going to happen from this. Like I better get reading. So I think that's a really important beat to nail. Okay, sorry, I went on a long tangent or a long answer on that one. We have a question from Isabella. Do you have any tips or advice regarding description, setting, and adding sense details to our writing? Maybe how to improve. Okay, description, setting, and sense. I'm guessing the sense is like what the hero's sensing, from the five senses. I'm assuming that's that's the meaning of that. Okay, so my best piece of advice for that is to try to insert it into your writing organically. And when I mean organically, I mean try not to open up a scene. Yeah, five senses. Okay, thank you. Try not to open up a scene of your novel with just 2 pages of description. Like, it was a blustery day in May and the wind was blowing and there was, leaves on the ground. I'm just looking out my window and describing it. Yeah, I mean, try not to just kind of dump description. It's kind of the same for setting, description, senses. Like, it feels sort of disjointed when you try to kind of just shove it in and like dump it in. And as a writer, we're like, oh, I need to set the scene. I need to let the reader know exactly where they are. So naturally you're like, I better get that all in. And that's fine. You can write it all down so you have it. But then I think the best descriptions and the best settings are sort of interwoven with what's happening in the story. So instead, maybe, start with a character whose, papers have just blown everywhere because of this gust of wind. And now they're anxiously trying to gather up the papers, and you're slowly letting the reader know how important these papers are and why. And, maybe there's a mystery about the papers, whatever. Again, just off the top of my head examples. But then you can really describe the wind and the senses and her getting blown, and it's hard to see and her eyes are watering as she's sort of describing this action thing. So I think sort of the best work of description, setting, and world building too happen within action. So I think that's my best piece of advice to you is try to interweave it with something actionable or something that's intriguing to the reader to want to keep reading. Mary's asking any tip for making the first line of the book as strong as possible. I love first lines. It's sort of my favorite thing about novel writing, reading and writing them. Because when you open a book and there's that like killer first line or even first paragraph where you just go, oh, this is gonna be good. And most of the time it is, most of the time the first line or paragraph is very telling. I just started a book on recommendation called My Best Friend's Exorcism. And it's just like really, I didn't, the title did not pull me in. I was like, I'm not really into horror. I don't know what this is. This is a very weird title. But she kept saying, read it, read it, read it. And I read like the first couple lines and I was like, okay, this is going to be good. This is very like just fun and it has a great voice and it just drew me in immediately. Um, but how do you do that, right? How do you actually get someone in that quickly? So I think that the first line should in some way um, invoke a question. It doesn't have to be a question, but in some way kind of have the reader asking something. So, for example, the first line of 52 Reasons to Hate My Father is my father's going to kill me. So, okay, that could be taken two ways. Based on the cover, which is nice and light and fluffy, it's probably not like literally going to kill me. Like it's not like a murder mystery. But you immediately are like, what does that mean? Why is he going to kill her? What is, there's something said about the relationship between the father and the daughter just by that one sentence. So I think that the first line often evokes a question, but also sort of fits into the story as a whole. I love when writers make that first line like thematically tie into the book. I think it can be challenging, but I think it's a really cool thing to do when it's done well. And I think it's a really cool thing to read. In terms of, when you're drafting, I wouldn't worry too much. Like, I don't want to get you guys all in your heads and then NaNoWriMo starts and you're like, oh my God, I can't come up with the perfect thematically tied first line that invokes a question. And then you never start. Don't worry about it right now. If it comes, it comes. If not, you can always add a first line later. You can always go back and tweak the first chapter. So if you're in a revision stage and you're in the sort of a final stage, that's when you kind of be worrying about, oh my God, is this the perfect first line? Otherwise, just sit down and write, because maybe the first line will come to you halfway through the book. Maybe you'll write the last line and go, oh, I know exactly what the first line needs to be. And it'll marry up perfectly with the last line. There's no way you could have known that when you started. So aren't you glad you didn't wait 10 years to figure out your first line? So I'm always a big fan of just write. Don't worry about it. You can fix it later. There's always time. So, but great question. I like that question a lot. Isabella says, I think starting strong is one of the most important and difficult aspects of any piece of writing. I agree. Strong openings are important and they're difficult. And if you're struggling with yours, just skip it. Just keep writing or write a really, really crappy opening that you'll fix later. I think, so Kai is asking, this is a kind of a good way to wrap up. Kai is asking, will you be participating in NaNoWriMo? So I'm gonna answer this question, then I'm gonna tell you some strategies for NaNoWriMo that hopefully will send you off into November 1st with some good tools. So yes, I am participating in NaNoWriMo for the second year in a row. My big joke is that every year of my life is a NaNoWriMo because I do write a lot of words every month. So I kind of feel like every month is National Novel Writing Month or Jessica's Novel Writing Month. But I will be participating like officially this year because I actually have a book due on December 31st. So I need to, I haven't started writing it yet. Don't tell my editor. Oh no, this is public. No, I've been working on the beat sheet. I've been working on the synopsis. I've been like really trying to get my outline and my synopsis really strong so that hopefully, like knock on wood, it will make the writing process easier. But, we always say that, right? Novelists always think, oh, this is going to make it easier. And it never does. But anyway, I'm hoping it'll kind of help keep me on track. So I'm going to have to write it very quickly once I finish. Truth be told, I will probably start writing it before NaNoWriMo, but I will be participating in the 50,000 word challenge for NaNoWriMo because I'm going to need it. I'm going to need those 50,000 words. So strategies for NaNoWriMo. I'm just going to give you a few, and you can always, I have blog posts about it. I have YouTube videos about it. You can find more information online. So NaNoWriMo is all about momentum. It's all about writing quickly and writing a lot. It's called National Novel Writing Month. It's not called National Novel Perfecting Month or National Novel Second Guessing Month. It's all about the writing, and you really just have to plow forward. What I love about this event is it sort of emulates the process that I've heard a lot of writers use, myself included, which is the process of bad drafting or fast drafting, however you want to call it. It's basically vomiting out a crappy draft. Because until you see the shape of your story in front of you, you cannot revise it or perfect it in any sort of clarity. So you sort of need to see what you're dealing with. I kind of think of it like a puzzle. So you've got all of these puzzle pieces, right, that make up your story. And you're trying to put them together without seeing what the picture looks like. Like when you get a puzzle, it has a picture and it's like, here's what you're trying to assemble. But in writing a novel is sort of like trying to assemble the puzzle without the picture. And so you've sort of got these pieces, you don't quite know where they go, but you've got to get all the pieces there. Like you've got to make sure you have all the pieces before you can start assembling them. So my best piece of advice to you is just keep writing. It's really hard. You're going to want to go back and edit. I would strongly advise you don't go back and edit because, for one, editing often means deleting, and deleting often means less words. And this is all about, the challenge of getting 50,000 words down. If you have something you want to change that is in the past, in your book, either write it down on a separate piece of paper or a separate document. Use the comment feature if you're using Word. Just leave yourself a comment that says, change this, and this is how. But don't actually change it yet for two reasons. One, it's going to waste time. You're going to spend much longer than you think making that change. Two, it's going to, it might not be a change that you end up keeping. So because you haven't finished the book, you don't quite know what the book needs to be. You don't know where it's going. And that change may end up getting changed again and again and again and again. And so you're just wasting more and more time. It's so much easier to just go back and add things to the comment. Like you can reply to comments in Word. So you can just keep adding layers to that comment. Like you can go back and go, okay, after page 50, I now know that this needs to be like this. And then after page 100, I now know that things need to be like this. But here's the trick. And this is where it gets very messy and people get very uncomfortable. But this is my tip for you guys. Once you figure out that you want to make a change, you can continue writing the book as though you've made the change. You don't have to keep writing the book based on the original version. So let's say you have a character, this is just a really simplistic example, but you have a character who's like a total dog person and, they start out rescuing a dog from the shelter, save the dog. And you keep going and then you realize, by page 50, they're like, no, they have to be a cat person because there's this really great plot point I want to do with cats. Fine. Go back and leave yourself a little note that says, change this to cat person. Now, wherever you left off, just keep writing as though it had always been a cat person and just keep going. This is where your book is going to make no sense to anybody but you. And it's going to be, a hot mess. And it's not even going to even follow logic, but it will make sense to you. And that's what matters. And as long as you leave yourself enough notes and enough, if you take enough notes and you leave yourself enough comments, you will be able to fix it later with more clarity. But that's my best piece of advice. Just keep writing. Don't change things. Keep very well-documented notes of what you want to change, but just keep writing and you're going to get there. 50,000 words is not as hard as it sounds as long as you are forward momentum every single day. Okay, so that's a great place to stop. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I had a great time chatting with you, and good luck on NaNoWriMo at the next web chat. Bye-bye.